Democratic Party since 2005. He holds a Doctor of Science in Health Policy and Management from the Harvard School of Public Health and is a professor of health economics at the University of Cologne. Comparing the current public health crisis with the climate crisis that is still being ignored by many, he urges the public to remember that there is no vaccine against climate change. Dr. Eckart von Hirschhausen is a physician, comedian, and talk show host. Having studied medicine, he successfully entered the show business in a variety of capacities. His recent focus has been on the intersection of medicine and planetary health, and the notion that only on a healthy planet there can be healthy people. The discussion will be chaired by Dr. Ganga Shredder from the Department of Psychological and Behavioral Science at LSE, whose research focuses on behavioral economics, and more specifically, environmentally relevant and health behaviors. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for being here today. Professor Lauterbach, please feel free to make your introductory statement.
Well, thank you so much. First of all, thank all of you for the opportunity to talk in this important symposium. I will give a brief introduction into what I think will be the most important issues coming up in the next, I would say, 2 or 3 decades, deciding whether climate change can be managed and what the long-term impact of climate change on individual and public health will be. And then I'm open for any discussion. Well, I think that generally speaking, the impact of climate change on public health and individual health is vastly underestimated. And most people appear to believe that it doesn't make a big difference whether it is 2 or 3 degrees centigrades warmer or colder, because we see major changes in the temperature within the course of a year. And we also see major changes from one place to another. So by traveling from one place to another, many people lack the fantasy, lack the imagination of what it may mean for the general population if we have an increase in temperature, for example, by 2 or 3 degrees, and what the impact of this will be in particular on health, both individual health and public health. Let me start with the most obvious, and this is becoming increasingly obvious even to, let's say, the mainstream media and to many individuals. A minor increase in the average temperature increases over proportionally the number of days with extreme heat in a particular given year. So in every particular given year in the last 10 years, we had more extreme heat days, roughly speaking, in almost all continents and countries which are inhabited. And even in Europe by now, death by extreme heat shock is one of the leading sources of death in the summertime. And it is particularly dangerous for the most vulnerable, because in particular elderly people become dehydrated very quickly. It is very difficult for them to stay hydrated, and many diseases are prone to quick worsening under extreme heat. So we, on average, for example, in a country like Germany, see a couple of thousands additional cases of death because of the extreme heat days that we currently already have. And if you look at this in projections, that will become a major problem in the summertime. More people will die from extreme heat every year. And that is something that will bring to our attention that heat is coming, that, let's say, the average temperature is increasing. What is not as much visible, but which on average is way more important in terms of, let's say, global consequences relating to climate change, greenhouse gases, and average temperature, is the outdoor quality, the outdoor air quality. With an increase in temperature, with rising temperature, there is more wildfires, and also there is, let's say, more fine particles and more ozone in the air. And indeed, fine particles, in particular fine particles that are smaller than 2.5 micrometers, are a leading cause of death and are very detrimental to human health, in particular to the vascular system. And it is clearly has clearly been shown that from environmental threats to public health, fine particle matter is the most important public health threat worldwide. It is underestimated how many organs and how many diseases relate to fine particle concentration. And even at levels where fine particle concentration is regarded low and is regarded as, let's say, within what is to be tolerated, there is already an increase in the number of deaths from cardiovascular diseases, in particular heart attacks, but also strokes. Fine particle matter impairs renal function and also impairs cerebrovascular circulation, and is therefore linked via the small vessel disease in the brain to long-term cognitive dysfunction and also to dementia. So the number of diseases that are directly related to fine particle increase, and that again being related to, let's say, rising temperatures, in combination with ozone concentration, is a major public health threat and is the leading environmental cause of preventable death worldwide. And there doesn't appear to be a threshold effect. So even at a very low level, fine particle matter, and in particular also fine particle matter that is even smaller than the 2.5 micrometer fine particles, the nanometer particles, they are particularly dangerous. I should also point out that fine particles relate directly to the development of dementia, both non-Alzheimer's dementia and Alzheimer's dementia. It has been shown that the fine particle matter is concentrated in the brain in these parts where, in particular, the Alzheimer's dementia starts to develop, and we see a clear-cut increase in Alzheimer's disease patterns independence of, let's say, the fine particle concentration in a city and in an environment. So this is a leading cause of death and is increasing at a rapid pace. Obviously, if there is an increase in temperature, you have more flooding, and there is more parts in the world where people cannot reliably live, where they cannot reliably depend on food security, where they cannot make a living. So that will lead to, let's say, migration, uncontrolled and controlled migration that will lead to a major loss of forests. It will lead to a major loss also of food production, and will impair the quality of food and also the availability of food. And with the growing population and the dwindling resources where we can expect a secure production of the necessary food in both quantity and quality, we will get problems that relates to flooding, but this also relates to the loss of coastal regions, and it also relates to the loss of arable land, which we lose because the heat basically makes this land non-arable. Well, vector-borne diseases, vector-borne infections have to be filled in. That is an increasing problem. For example, Lyme disease becoming ever more prevalent in the northern hemisphere. The same holds obviously for water-related infections. If there is more flooding, there will be more water-borne infection, water-related infections. And ultimately, we also have to take into consideration what we currently see. With climate change, there will be a disproportional effect on animals, because while human beings are in a position to adapt to various climates, we have clothes, we can use heating, we can use air conditioner, we can move around, we have technical devices. Most animals are not in a position to basically live in conditions that are only slightly different from where they used to live. So therefore, they are way more vulnerable to even minor changes in temperature, minor changes in humidity, and also minor changes in their nutritional environment, including basically the environment in which they are prey or can get prey, where they basically depend on the general ecosystem in which they are living. So if these ecosystems are destroyed, these animals, they basically have to change, they have to get into different ecosystems. And with the turmoil of the ecosystem, we will have increasingly zoonotic diseases, because this will lead to the fact that more viruses will basically jump from one species to another species, and from that last species onto humans. And this is what happened with SARS-CoV. There is more to come. There is quite clearly more to come. We in total expect more than 1,000 already known viruses that are currently limited to animals, but that could potentially also live in human beings and are potentially causes of future pandemics. So we will see an increase in pandemics. So let me sum up what I see here. First of all, the immediate effects of extreme heat and also extreme cold. We see the deterioration of air quality, and in particular the threat by fine particle distribution in the air, and with that cardiovascular diseases, dementias, cognitive declines, and lowered quality of life. This is already the leading public health threat, environmental threat that the WHO has identified. With flooding and with, let's say, a loss of arable land, we will see migration patterns that are difficult for everyone, most difficult for those people who are the migrants. These are major losses in the quality of life, and also major losses in, let's say, traditions, culture, upheavals that may even lead to civil wars, and worse, even to wars between countries when there is migration patterns that are out of control. Waterborne and vector-borne diseases I have already mentioned. Then we have the problem with zoonotic diseases, future pandemics. So all things considered, climate change is a major public health threat and a major individual health threat, and we have to address this as that. And because if we do not do this, the public will not understand what the threat actually is. Then many people, as I mentioned in the beginning, they simply lack the fantasy, they lack the imagination, what it means if the climate is changing at the rapid speed it currently is changing, and what a threat this is for, let's say, even peace, but in particular individual and public health. That much for my short introduction, and I thank you for the attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Lauterbach. And over to you, Dr. von Hirschhausen.
Yes, hello to London. I would love to be there right now. I used to study medicine, and 1 year I passed in London at the Royal Free Hospital. And I want to strengthen what colleague Karl Lauterbach said, and I share with you now my screen and a little video of one of the most important initiatives in the field of the connection between climate change and public health. It's called the Lancet Climate Countdown. For every medical student, the Lancet is a must-read journal, and they have a little video that I want to share first, so that sums up nicely what Karl just said.
Has given us a glimpse of a possible future. It has shown us that when health is threatened on a global scale, our way of life is brought to a standstill. But threats to global health will grow, and the disruption.
Do you get the audio?
Yes, everything's good, yeah.
Okay.
Follows if we don't take action to address climate change now. The Lancet Countdown brings together 120 leading scientists and health experts to track how the world's changing climate is impacting on our health. This year's report reveals the most concerning outlook yet. climate change is fueling a health crisis that threatens every continent, country, and community. No one remains untouched. From small islands to big cities, climate change has driven an increase in the number and intensity of extreme weather events. Heat-related deaths in people aged over 65 have increased by more than 50% in the past 2 decades, with older people in Japan, northern India, eastern China, and central Europe most vulnerable. People living in countries such as Bangladesh, South Africa, and Ethiopia face a future of undernutrition. Warmer temperatures, flooding, and drought put food security at risk. People's exposure to wildfires has risen in 128 countries, compared with 15 years ago, aggravating heart and lung conditions. Recent fires in North America and Australia have claimed lives and livelihoods. Climate suitability for the spread of infectious diseases such as dengue and malaria is rising. Climate change, coupled with other environmental harms, could increase the risk of new pandemics. Climate change impacts us all, but the vulnerable in our world will feel its health harms most acutely. A brighter future is possible. Responding to climate change by reducing global carbon emissions will bring immediate health benefits through cleaner air, healthier diets, and more livable cities. 3 million people die prematurely each year from heart and lung diseases linked to ambient particulate air pollution. Cleaner air inside and out would prevent a large number of future deaths. A further 1 million deaths in 2017 were associated with eating excessive red meat, a risk factor for diseases such as cancer and heart disease. Promoting healthier diets around the world would save millions of lives, while reducing significant emissions from livestock. Time is short. Our failure to respond to climate change is damaging the health of the world's 7.8 billion citizens today. If we don't act now, we will condemn each other to a future of climate-induced health shocks. The global pandemic has presented the circumstances from which to reset. Responding to these converging crises offers a triple win: protect public health, promote sustainable economies, preserve our planet. We must now choose the world we want to live in.
For further information, you can always check the Lancet Climate Countdown homepage. And now I want to switch over to presenting my own NGO. It's called Healthy Planet, Healthy People. And I'm convinced that most of you will think after this talk, which side do you want to be on? Do you want to be part of the problem or part of the solution? And I'm happy to know that there are many young people in the audience now who are attending the London School of Economics and Political Sciences. And that means that you're rich, that you're smart, and you're responsible. You're responsible for correcting all the errors that the professors of economics have done during the last 100 years. Because the market facts all will solve this problem. If you're talking about the dilemma of there's no glory in prevention, just think about how many deaths could have been avoided, how many billions of dollars, pounds, and euros could have been saved if we just cut down the wild animal markets worldwide. But this hasn't happened. Even after Karl mentioned all the zoonosis diseases, HIV, SARS, Ebola, you name it, they are all having the same source. People are treating animals, treating nature like a resource and not respecting the limits. And so I want to address that happiness is much more important than money, because nobody can buy his own temperature outside. With no money in the world, you will be able to have a new planet. So we're getting a good offer to you. You're getting, in my talk, 3 crises for the price of 2. And I apologize, I didn't have time to switch all the presentation in English, but I know that many native speakers are among us, so you will enjoy my German accent. This woman has changed my life, so to speak. This is Jane Goodall, a British icon. If you have ever the chance to meet her, do so. She's one of the most charismatic people I've ever had the chance as an interviewer to meet. And she has been recognized worldwide through by her research on chimpanzees. But what really affected me was one simple question that I want to pose to you. Jane looked me straight into my eyes and asked me one question. If the human being claims to be the most important species ever to walk on planet Earth, why are we destroying our own home? And this is so fundamentally important to face this question, because we are in an existential crisis that most economical professors have not even an idea of. And we have only roughly 10 years left to keep away from planetary boundaries, to keep away from points of no return, of irresponsible and irreversible changes called the tipping points. Why are we called upon acting? Jane told me one important thing, that human beings are the only species on the world to say goodbye. Every animal has some way of saying hello, but no animal has a goodbye. Why is that important? Because we are the only species with an idea of future. We know when we're saying goodbye, oh, maybe we bump into each other again. This doesn't, and so we are doomed. We are the only species who can care about the future, so we better do. When we're talking about destroying our home, I want to show you our common home. This is planet Earth. It's unique. It's the only place in the whole universe which has water, which has oxygen, which has temperatures we can live by so far. And even to get the remotest economic students interested, it's the only place on the whole scale where you have coffee, sex, and chocolate. So there should be an interest in everyone. Where do we want to go with this world? We have the UN agenda of sustainable development goals, and oftentimes they're just next to each other. But basically, you have to see them as a pyramid. And before we come to the economy, this is here, we need the biosphere. Fuck the economy if you fuck up with the biosphere. If you don't have water, if you don't have food, if you don't have fresh air, what good is the economy? And I love this picture. It's a Facebook posting of a golf course, and they're proud to finishing the round. And this picture illustrates, are we really putting the first things first? Are we doing a good on prioritizing? Ecology and economy have for a long time been in a very wrong image of being contrary to each other. But look at McKinsey, Climate Risk and Response. Even the hard economical thinkers are coming to grip the problem. The World Economic Forum, they say, what are the real threats to the economy? It's obesity, it's undernutrition and climate change, human health and well-being, and ecological health and well-being. And they are not a leftist ecological hippie group. This is the World Economic Forum we're talking about. Even BlackRock now announces it's important. So there has been enough evidence to say we are on the wrong path. Just think about my lifetime. I'm over 50 now. In my lifetime, we have crossed that important curve number of planets. We have only one planet. We are now destroying it on a really large scale. If you Google the great acceleration, you can have all the data. It's not a problem of data. And there are some economists that got the idea first, like Herman Daly. While the invisible hand looks after the private sector, the invisible foot kicks the public sector to pieces. And there's something fundamentally wrong in treating the earth as if it were a business in liquidation. One fundamental idea that changed my thinking was the idea of an empty world and a full world. And if you're not familiar with this, go into it. It's very important because the whole idea of growth, and growth saves all the economical problems, is old and it's outdated, because growth can only happen in an empty world. If you have a water full of sea and you have one fisher boat, the economist will tell you, buy a second boat, you will have double fish. That's right, unless you're in a full world with 8 billion people and an empty ocean. When you buy more boats, you're adding to the problem and you will have no fish at all. And this change is so fundamental that many economical theories are not addressing this. Social tipping dynamics for stabilizing Earth climate is a study done by people from the Potsdam Institute of Climate Change. Ilona Otto, if you're interested, I can share the studies if you want to. Financial markets, fossil fuel divestment is one of the fastest way of addressing one of the big problems. Karl mentioned COVID-19. Where do you have the worst causes of COVID-19? Where you have most death? Where the air pollution is strong. In China, in northern Italy, there's a strong evidence that you have a pre-damaged lung and then you get the virus and you get double sick. Research shows that showing people research doesn't work. And this fundamentally too. We need to have this topic at the center of our hearts, not only in our minds. And because I'm talking to economical students, there are many things important in life you cannot buy. If you think of free hugs and you're a clever student, and you think I will offer deluxe hugs for $2, you didn't get the idea. This is why many young people joined Fridays for Future. And I founded Scientists for Future as a response to Friday for Future. When you want to look it up, the concerns of the young protesters are justified was signed by 28,000 scientists in whole Europe. If you're capable of German, watch this video. It got more than 20 million views, Riso. He quoted the Scientists for Future press conference. Sometimes a picture says it all. You often think we are in the center of the world and the rest is just there for us. No, we are not the crown of the creation. We are part of it. And watch what scale does to this. We have made enormous successes in getting life expectancy up, in lowering child morbidity, and so on. And the last 20 years, we are reversing this. We had really great cause in many human factors, but now we are outweighing the whole evolution. Just to get you an idea, 10,000 years ago, when we started to multiply because we developed agriculture, there was 1% human beings on the planet if you take the weight, the biomass of the people, and 99% were wildlife. In this course, very short in Earth time, we changed it completely. Now we have 1% wildlife left, 1/3 is human beings, and 2/3 are animals of human beings. And this is crazy. These animals are the cause, the root cause, why we are destroying our natural resources. We're destroying tropical forests, we're feeding them with stuff that people could eat directly, and they're shitting all over the place, they're burping, they're destroying the atmosphere. What for? If you want to be effective, take a look at these two guys. They were economics students in Germany. They wrote a little book, got a sponsor, and for €5, they got the most concise homepage of Kleine Gase, große Wirkung. if you ask the World Health Organization, what are the 10 biggest threats to global health, they're all linked more or less to climate crisis, to feeding industrial animals, and the loss of wildlife and diversity. To walk in the forest should be healthy and shouldn't be a health threat. Allergies are rising. We have invasive species in nature. And above all, I loved in London the Institute of Tropical Hygiene. I love to think of going somewhere and go into developing countries and be a hero. But now all these diseases are coming to the center of Europe. You don't have to go somewhere else to get malaria, West Nile virus, chikungunya, or coronavirus. And this all adds up in one new paradigm that's called planetary health, or One Health, which means you have to think the health of the environment, the health of the animals, and the health of human beings only in a connection. And this translates to gesunde Erde, gesunde Menschen in German. Why are things moving so slow? Because there are some people who have a lot of money who are interested in that nothing happens. And if you want to, if you have a Netflix abo, you should look Merchants of Doubt. It's a brilliant film showing how the public opinion can be influenced by very few people if you know how. Democracy, I'm talking to a country who left Europe, is a threat, and it's closely connected to climate denial populism, to right-wing parties all over Europe are getting strength. And this is a study that shook my eyes. And I want to tell you that it was a Briton who got my attention to this. He is called George Marshall. If you look up climateoutreach.org, he is one of the central advisors to The Guardian, and he's one of the most brilliant communicators of climate sciences. And he says, we have to take it out from being a leftish, greenish thing of one party. This is so fundamental that every institution, every profession, and every age group must have a stance to this problem. Ilona Otto, again, from the has a very interesting study on shift the focus from the super poor to the super rich. Think of Bill Gates, think of the big foundations, think of how much, especially the people who talk, they are so healthy and they're so environmentally friendly. They have the biggest footprint of all. And this was my one moment of fame when Bill Gates and his foundation opened up a new bureau in Berlin. And now actually they are supporting my Healthy Planet, Healthy People Foundation. If you're a kid of a rich family, think of who is the most important, who's the most influential person in your whole network. Who can you talk to? Who has money? Who has influence on the media? Who has influence on what is being taught in the universities? And look up active philanthropy, so that every philanthropical investment should be connected. At the moment in Europe, only 1% of all the funding of philanthropy is concerned with the biggest problem we have. So there's a big mismatch as well. We are destroying what we love. We go far abroad because we want to be on our own. This is the picture of the catalog, and this is the reality. If we go there, we destroy what we love. And this is what the global tourism is about. I told you we're the only animal who can plan ahead, but we're not very good at it, as this Department of Planning shows. One of the problems is that it's hard to visualize the climate things. For example, we did a demonstration on one of the hottest days. As you could see in the Lancet Climate Countdown, Germany is hardly affected. We had 20,000 deaths of heat last summer. So 42 degrees is an emergency. For the German lovers, climate is like beer. If it's too hot, it's shitty. Let's talk about the advantages of the gains in life quality we can have with a planetary health diet could prevent millions of deaths a year and avoid climate change. If you look in a city like Copenhagen, it's a lovely place. It has one of the highest life qualities. Why? Because you can drive with a bicycle safely. So the cliche is that environmentalism is taking us something away. And we have to get there, that we are talking about which world do we want to live in? Which world is livable? What do we want to share? What is important? And if we consider growth being the only thing that matters, I can give you a very direct feedback from a physician. If there's continuous growth in your body, it's called cancer. The idea of continuous growth in a limited environment is sick. So as I was introduced, I work in the media. I work as a TV presenter, as a stand-up comedian. I work with the NGOs. And this visualization is very strong because it shows us that we are losing our own homes. We are losing what the Germans say with Heimat. London will be like Barcelona by the year 2050. So if you're looking outside the window, you think, well, that's something we gain. But think of that it as really a fundamental loss of things that you love from your childhood. So why are physicians called upon being more public? The Gesundheitsberufe are there to protect health, to tell the audience, to tell the patients what is coming. And we are the ones who have the biggest trust in, of all the professions. This is why I founded Healthy Planet, Healthy People. And this was in 2019, where the global climate strike was really big in Berlin, and we could even move many doctors, many nurses, many other health professionals to say, well, this is a medical problem, please address it. So I'm very interested to hear what you've got to say. And if you want to reach me, you can check my website, or you can direct mail, or now I think we have a chat function to see what really is your input and how you want to be part of the solution. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So that's just really important, even for someone like me who's working on climate change, to hear this from physicians. And in behavioral science, you have hit upon this, Dr. Eckart, in terms of the messenger is really important. So to hear the conversations in public health from a behavioral science perspective and from a psychological perspective is really important, because I think there's an agreement that we should connect up across disciplines as well to address this issue, because it's truly a collective action problem. So I have one question for each of you, and then I think we've got a fantastic list of audience questions. So I'm going to sort of curate that and direct them to you guys. So the question I have for you, Dr. Lauterbach, is, so clearly this is, we've sort of stepped around COVID and both of you have made this really important point that there's going to be an increased risk of zoonotic spillovers in the future. So my research, actually, keeping in mind that people don't really like to listen to facts and don't digest that very well from a behavioral perspective, I've started to look at storytelling and how storytelling is really important to communicate and connect up these complex issues. Because what we're essentially looking at is complex system dynamics, where you have climate change being caused by many people in different ways in organizations and firms. And the response to that has to also be across these scales: individuals, firms, governments, everyone has to work together. What we found was when you actually have media stories where you have this linking up, telling people that actually this public health issue is caused by the destruction of nature. And we're going to have an increased risk of zoonotic spillovers because we're destroying nature. We find people are more likely to support conservation policies around wet markets, wildlife trade, etc. I was really happy to find that in my research. Unfortunately, the moment you include a bit of uncertainty about that information, because remember, when we have all these open questions about what has caused coronavirus, and one of those questions is, it's very difficult to say 100% scientific uncertainty that it's this particular animal who has caused the outbreak. And then you have counter narratives, which are often politically motivated, like, it's the Wuhan lab, actually, a biosecurity narrative, it's 5G. So you have a lot of fake news and you have these counter stories. Whenever stories include this counter view, we lose support entirely. So, I mean, my question to you, Dr. Lauterbach, is, do you think that the experience of COVID has changed people's appetite for collective action to address climate change? And to you, Dr. Eckart, I ask, what can we do to communicate better? And is humor important? How can we change the stories that we're telling about this issue?
Well, thank you for this very important question. I have thought about this quite frequently because in the last couple of years, I have politically become more and more involved in making climate change an issue into which I'm investing my political time as a social democrat, which is, let's say, not standard position for social democrats in Germany. We have the Green Party, where this is basically the standard agenda, but I believe that from a social democratic perspective, from a center-left perspective, climate change is the overriding concern and should be the overriding concern, in particular for young people. So in that sense, I also agree with all of what Eckart has mentioned, and we collaborate on many occasions together. So there is, let's say, in terms of my background. That having said, I think the pandemic made me somewhat worried that the collective action that we would have needed to defeat COVID without a vaccine, we would not have been able to mount, at least in Germany not, and most likely not in Europe, and definitely not in the US. So from the perspective of a public health researcher, it appears to me fair to say that the conclusion is, without the fix of vaccines, and these vaccines may, by the way, not ultimately fix the problem, not even ultimately fix the COVID problem, because of mutations to come that are not as easily preventable with vaccines. It is not quite clear whether in the long run we will have vaccines that will be able to deal with the problem. From that perspective, I'm disappointed that we were not able to control the pandemic with public health measures, because we know how to do it. We clearly know how to do it. We have evidence-based measures. It has been shown we can do it. A zero COVID strategy would be possible, but I think it's not realistically to be expected in Europe, and also not in the UK, from what I can see, and definitely not in Germany, and even more definitely not so in the US, even after the change of a government there. So that is making me very worried. And I agree, the research clearly shows at the very moment when you make a scientific question a political question, the science is dead. So therefore, the easiest strategy basically to finish a scientific debate which you are losing is you make it a political issue. And at the very moment when you manage to make a scientific issue a political issue, the superior scientist is going to lose the debate. It's then basically us against them, and it falls into, let's say, the ritualistic disagreements where the arguments the scientist per se doesn't have. Having thought about this dilemma, and having mentioned this, let's say, more pessimistic outlook on what is going to happen, I have come to the conclusion that it is very important that more scientists enter the political process and become politicians, because it is clearly the fact that, let's say, politicians who are not prepared to work responsibly against climate change, they make science political. And if we want to win that, we have to make politics more scientific. So we have to go the other way around. That is my personal conclusion. So my personal conclusion is that let's say, a major entry of scientists into the sphere of politics is the only way that we can move forward here.
Thank you. Dr. Eckart, how can we communicate this better using better stories, and what's the role of humor?
Big question. So one example was the masks at the beginning of the pandemic. I have one with a colored stripes for the climate heat. There was a big debate: how much evidence do we need to wear masks as a general recommendation? And then several people in Germany stood up and made a video that even without the last 100% of evidence, it makes a lot of sense. And if you balance the risks of wearing masks to the potential benefits, it's a clear-cut thing. So this argument that climate deniers are always using, the scientists are not safe, they're not sure themselves, is really a big trap. And if we have time, I want to show you one of my favorite sketches. It's John Oliver, who's a god of communicating with humor. It's linked on the webpage, yeah. And you'll get the idea very quickly.
The Earth. You may know it as that blue thing Bruce Willis is always trying to save, or from its famous collaboration with wind and fire, or just simply as that place where George Clooney lives. Anyway, the Earth had some genuinely bad news this week.
A White House report that says global warming threatens every part of the U.S.
This isn't something in the distant future. Climate change is already affecting us now.
Now. Smart move, Obama. That is a key shift in how to talk about climate change, because we've all proven that we cannot be trusted with the future tense. We've been repeatedly asked, don't you want to leave a better Earth for your grandchildren? And we've all collectively responded, fuck them. Incredibly, this latest damning scientific report may still face an uphill climb with some of us.
There's that Gallup poll that came out last month, which found 1 in 4 Americans is skeptical of all the effects of climate change and thinks this issue's been exaggerated.
Who gives a shit? That doesn't matter. You don't need people's opinions on a fact. You might as well have a poll asking which number is bigger, 15 or 5. Or do owls exist? Or are there hats? The debate on climate change.
I skip forward. It's a good answer to your question, but in media, this is called the dilemma of false balance. If you ask climate scientists and some media people think, well, you have to invite climate denier so to balance things. And I'll skip forward. He asked the Bill Nye, who's the science guy, and he starts talking. And this is just the last moment.
Science guy. Humans are causing climate change. No, wait. Before we begin, in the interest of mathematical balance, I'm going to bring out 2 people who agree with you, climate skeptic. And Bill Nye, I'm also going to bring out 96 other scientists. It's a little unwieldy, but this is the only way you can actually have a representative discussion. So yeah, please file in. Again, this is going to make the debate difficult. We shouldn't really be having it in.
So, Ganda, to answer your question, to have a representative debate, you would have 70 people on one side and 2 on the other. And this is never shown on media. So one way of communicating with humor is to address these things in the form of sketches. And then people think, well, yeah, it is there are very few things in sciences who are so well researched, so consensual like climate change. So the IPCC reports are so clear, but the big challenge is to bring it to other communities like the economical community we're talking right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And this does sort of fit in with a lot of behavioral science literature, which suggests that when you're exposed to a bit of uncertainty around particular issues, you will update your beliefs most likely in the direction of your prior beliefs.
Yeah,
so
that's a confirmation bias.
Exactly. And we call this confirmation bias. And the other thing is we often use a lot of fear messaging, and it is a scary topic, and we have to acknowledge that the outcomes are very scary. But people, it's not entirely clear when fear works. And that's why we're increasingly, I'm curious to think about what are the more positive approaches which we can communicate the seriousness of an issue.
Do you know that
motivating people?
Yeah, I asked to the audience who listens to TED Talks. I love them. I've been to one of the conferences, and one of my favorite TED Talks is by a guy called Stockness. I will add this to the chat. And it's called How to Transform Apocalypse Fatigue into Action on Global Warming. Yeah. And he's brilliant on the question of how to address people the issues without the apocalypse theme. So you know it, Ganda?
Yeah, I would love to actually think about how to systematize that in behavioral interventions.
Yeah, when you continue with this lecture, have a talk by Per Espen Stockness. He's great.
Well, good. Thank you so much. Because I think what is coming out is, as Professor Lauterbach has said, like, we need to actually convert awareness and concern to action.
Yes.
And for that, you do need political appetite and actually policies and change. So I'm going to actually use that as a jumping point to think of some of the really interesting questions which have sort of come up here. And Mara Weidemann from Mannheim, a student from Hamburg, asked, where should the responsibility start? Should it be private consumers, industry, or government? And I think this is linking up to another question by Maxim Wok from LSE, who says, how can we educate people to eat less meat, for instance? So what is the core of the solution? So I guess the question more broadly is, where do solutions start and who sustains solutions? Professor Karl, maybe first, and then we could go to Professor Eckart.
Thank you. Well, first of all, the three levels, individuals and let's say organizations and states. So the responsibility obviously is necessary on all levels. And but what will mostly drive the actual change is government action, because government action which changes a major policy also it changes the expectations. Even, let's say, if something changes that you have in the past always believed is impossible that this would ever, let's say, happen or would ever work, or if that would ever allow for a good quality of life and so forth. Once it's in place and people get used to it, and after a short period of time, they will not even be prepared to live without it. So in that sense, I think that, let's say, the impact of politics is underestimated. It is very quick to say and easy to say, let's say, that individual, choices, they are important, that you are quick to say that this is the most meaningful. But as a matter of fact, no, in my personal opinion, it is mostly politics that drives the direction into which we are going. And individual, let's say, behavior makes a difference. And it also makes a difference in, for example, what people do vote for. But you never should underestimate, let's say, the possibilities of politics to organize votes, even from people who would never vote for you if they would fully understand what the choices are. So let's say the voting game is a very difficult game and is becoming ever more vulnerable, as a matter of fact, even in well-organized democracies. So in that sense, I stick to what I recommended in the first round. My recommendations from the experience that I do have as a scientist, as a citizen who has lived for 10 years in the US and who frequently travels from Boston to Germany. In Boston, I do have an adjunct professorship at the Harvard School of Public Health, so I know the field quite well. But from that experience, I would still say politics drives the issue mostly. That's my personal conviction. And would you remind me of the second question that you posed? I'm sorry, I do not exactly. You raised two interesting questions, and I spent too much time in answering the first one. I spent so much that I forgot the second question. So I apologize for that, but would you be so kind as to repeat the second question briefly for me?
I think maybe you've answered them both together in the sense that where does change come from?
Okay.
And in a way, it feels like individual behavior change is good insofar as it informs their political action and appetite for broader change.
Right.
But ultimately, regulations set expectation for corporates as well as individuals. So really,
Right.
Yeah, amazing. What about you, Dr. Eckhart? How do you tackle that one?
Let's take two historical examples. When it was obvious that FCKW is how you say the stuff in the hairspray in the refrigerators were causing the ozone depletion. It was one of the most successful stories in mankind to say we stop producing them worldwide. Just imagine if you had a scheme where you said, well, let's try to use a bit less and well, I promise I will save on using hairspray. It would have no effect. So this is one of the key examples of how you need international organizations, and the Paris Agreement is the second biggest success. Now we have to stick to the rules, but to have an international political treaty is great, and I'm so happy that America joined again with Joe Biden. I mean, just think of having 4 more years with Trump. So there's some hope in the game, but I think the longer I'm speaking with people who are much longer in the field, the overemphasis on the consumer as being the game changer and being the culprit because they're buying the wrong things is really a big deception of the fossil industry, to be clear. Oftentimes you don't have much choices, and this is because the prices are wrong. If you're buying meat so cheap, it's not a real price for all the damage that's done. And so we need a high carbon price. Some people say we even need 600 euros or such if you combine all the damages done. And this would immediately change the whole game. And I'm really angry at our government in Germany, which part of the Social Democrats are part of this, Karl, that they didn't get
I cannot hear you.
they didn't get a proper CO2 pricing. But I'll give you an example, Ganda, of humor. When I do stand-up comedy, I say, well, take about meat. I love the book of Jonathan Safran Foer. You may know it. It's We Are the Climate. It's a great book. He has written Eating Animals before. And I humorously put, many people would eat less meat if it would be an obligation to purchase at the cashier at the supermarket. For every pound of meat that you buy, you get a gallon of cow shit, yeah, with it. Because that is basically the relation. For every kilo, you have 20 kilos of manure, I think is the word, is it? Yeah. Manure. And
cow shit's also fine.
Yeah, just imagine you are there and you buy your beef and you have this bucket handed over and you say, well, yeah, you're buying this. It's a combination. You can only have the two together. And that would make people think.
I can think of a bunch of behavioral interventions to make the carbon impacts more salient of your current consumption patterns.
Yeah, there's always on every stupid chocolate bar, you have all the energy, but you never instructed to buy according to carbon imprint. For example, a soup with meat is 20 times more expensive for the atmosphere than one is simple with vegetables. And when you tell people, they say, well, does it really taste 20 times better? No. Sometimes I eat meat, but I don't need it every day. And the shame is that many countries who, Hans Rosling is great in illustrating these things. Yeah. We're coming out of poverty, and the first thing that they want is a meat. And of course, it's great to have people getting away from hunger, but meat is really one thing that kills all of us, not only in the animals.
Absolutely. So I'm going to integrate questions across people.
Please.
So many apologies, but I'm trying to get more themes in. So apologies if I miss your name, but I hope I've collected at least the spirit of your question. So this is one a bit about the international dimension of climate change. So this is an aggregation of a question from René Reuter from UNEHAL, but also, Julia Crow from LSC, but who's an Aachen, and as well as Benjamin. So a couple of people have asked, basically, you were talking about structures for international change, and it's a global problem, right? So while stuff around ozone worked, the Kyoto Protocol really hasn't had the same desired effect. And you also have the capacity for companies, whether they're car companies or even food companies, KitKat, like lots of companies operating across international borders. So increasing the stringency of regulations in one place might allow companies to move to others. So it's truly a global problem. So what kind of governance and institutional structures are needed to address this dimension, in your opinion?
Have you heard of the European Union?
Yes.
Sounds familiar?
Yes. I think a lot of maybe people in the UK might not want to hear of it. But
No, Karl, you're much closer to the policy making.
Yeah, I think that the European Union, to start with that, is actually currently losing impact in many respects, because within the pandemic control, the European Union appeared to be not as big a part of the solution as many people had hoped, obviously. One major problem of the European Union was that the way that the vaccination was bought, organized, and was supposed to be distributed among the member states was way more slow than what happened in market-driven economies like in the US, in the UK, in Israel, and in, for example, the Middle East. So the European Union mismanaged the acquisition of vaccines in, simply put, buying too little too late. And since the costs of the pandemic are such huge, the public is vastly disappointed in all of Europe. There was a single first opportunity of the European Union to help deal with a major public health threat. And it actually did not work. So far, it has not really. The contribution of the, and I'm a pro-European Union member of the Social Democratic Party, so I'm not a nationalist in any respect, and I was in favor of the European Union buying the vaccines for Germany. Germany would have been able to buy the vaccines independently from the European Union. Our Minister of Health proposed this. Many, let's say, policymakers in the government were against this nationalistic approach, me included. But it is fair to say that the European Union basically they failed at that major challenge. That makes me very worried about how, let's say, forceful the European Union will be as, let's say, the institutions that successfully addresses climate change. And it is indeed the wide range of positions that you have to respect in the European Union that, let's say, dictates the speed of the movement. So mostly to name the situation is the Eastern European countries, which in the climate change debate lower the speed of the European Union movement for making climate change a big policy issue. These were also the states that made it more difficult to buy, let's say, vaccines at a high price early on in huge quantities because they were not prepared to spend as much, they were not prepared to invest into particular disease. That is a long story. I could speak about this for 2 hours, but the good news is I will not. But nevertheless, so I'm worried. I'm worried. The problem basically is that the European Union, in that sense, currently, I think is not the most forceful organization to push for. Having said that, I think that we should reorganize also our national efforts, but should not see these in competition to the international efforts. But to rely on international efforts is often a cheap way to push away responsibility. And I strongly believe that, let's say, government action within the states, responsible government actions within a state, they are what is needed. And this is as true as it is in, let's say, public health management, better nutrition, more vegetarian or vegan nutrition. By the way, that was the second question, which I was not able to remember.
Yes.
Because I was asked, how can we make people, let's say, eat healthier food? We have to point out that, let's say, vegetarian and vegan food is at the same time more healthy, offers a better quality of life, and is for environment. So it needs to be seen as a winner strategy. We need to basically change the view that a person who eats a lot of meat is seen as a loser, as a person who is basically not able to understand the benefits of who is not prepared to see the benefits for himself and for the society of a more responsible and also more rational, and in that sense also, let's say, a more successful way of nutrition. So as long as we cannot change these images, we will not prevail, but we need action, government action, which makes that change possible. And that, in my opinion, has to be on the level of the countries and cannot be deferred to international agencies, despite the fact that they are important, but they are not the main drivers in my point of view.
Yeah. I'll give you an example of the fossil fuel industry in Germany. Is still using a lot of lignite, Braunkohle, which is it's a crime. It's the dirtiest way of getting energy. It's polluting the air and it's polluting the planet, the atmosphere. And they said very cynically, well, we are in favor of a carbon price, but just make sure that it's the same price all over Europe. And they could say this only because they were sure that this will give them 10 more years to still burn oil and coal. So sometimes asking for a big solution is a strategy of slowing things down. Yeah. And so I think Karl is completely right. Let's talk about positive examples. The city of Copenhagen has just signed a law that in schools, in all the public domains, in hospitals, you have to have 80% of organic food. And immediately the market for organic food rises because many people are not eating at home, leaving Corona apart, but in institutions. And these are leverages enormous. And to tax things that are like sugar, that are cheap and are destroying people's lives, especially children's. I worked as a children's doctor, as a pediatrician and child psychiatry. And the burden, something that we haven't talked about yet, but is really important, the burden on mental health is enormous too. This feeling of hopelessness, of solastalgia, which is a new term for addressing the feel of loss that something that you love will not come back. And this was coined in Australia by a philosopher there. Solastalgia, if you look it up, is a very important concept. Solastalgia. It's a mix of the Latin word for comfort and the pain. And if you ever came across it on an open coal mine, you will immediately fear that what are we doing to Mother Earth? This is a pain. There's a great a poet from Iceland who writes about all the losses of the landscape with the glaciers, and we have to acknowledge that this is really an emotional issue. It's not nothing only of scientists and of physics and of metrics. It's something that we have to acknowledge. We are really in a very dangerous and shitty position at the moment. And if we don't acknowledge the pain that we have, we will not get more people into action. And so this is a bit of a brainy thing to know the basics, to know the scales, but to acknowledge that this is a psychological issue too. Heat is really causing the productivity of the brain cells to go down. What we're losing of creativity has never been measured. I can never get a good idea above 35 degrees. So think of all the hospitals who have no air conditioning, of all the old old people's homes. They're dying because there's no tree in the front, there's no shade, there are no ways of cooling down. And all this is not ever considered in an economical scale. So what is the world we want to live in? And what are we planning now to save our asses? We don't have to save the planet. We have to save the climate. We have to save us, to put it bluntly.
I mean, that's a really important point, because I think both of you have touched upon the fact that while this is a collective action issue, also it's an individual personal issue. And there's a lot to gain personally in terms of your health, actually, in seeking to address this collective action issue. And in fact, some of my research shows that when you actually communicate in terms of both personal health as well as planetary health, people are not just more likely to say reduce meat consumption, but they're also more likely to say donate and take a subsequent environmental action. So just talking in terms of individuals versus society or the planet is not enough, really. It's at a time where we actually have to bring those things together. Great, and I think that's what looking at planetary health, environmental health really does. It brings quite an intangible issue and makes it very personal, makes it about everyone's health. And maybe those are the sorts of stories we should start saying and scaling in terms of communication, because it allows us to really personalize the risk and have these actions across scales. We're nearly at time, and I see Isolde has popped back in to tell us to wrap up. Is that right? Would you like to say the last word? Maybe one last word from each of you. What would you like the audience to remember? And many apologies for the fascinating questions I didn't get. Maybe Isolde, you could, sort of take the questions and forward them on email to the speakers in case they have time to respond individually. But one last word for the audience before we're off from each of you.
Perhaps I start. I should perhaps go ahead, if that is okay. My recommendation really is, and also my appeal to everyone is that as many of you should go indeed into politics as far as those are concerned that want to make a major change. We have too few, let's say, environmentally interested people who are prepared to step into political life, and you are badly needed. That is my own position here, my own experience also from, let's say, almost 20 years in politics. It is very difficult to change political positions from the outside, even if you have the better argument. If you have a better argument, when I was publishing in my field, I was in preventive medicine. The publications that I expected politicians to be interested in, and by the sheer force of the argument in my papers to basically then change their policy, it never happened. My influence only came about when I was first advising politicians and later became a politician myself. So if you want to make a change, and if you want to have an impact, don't make the mistake and believe that there are already so many young people who enter politics, and it doesn't depend on you. It is it's a misconception. Very few scientists ever enter politics. Scientists are a rarity, an extreme rarity in politics. I mean, we often say we need more business people in the field of politics. We have more business people in politics than you actually need. What we do need is scientists in politics.
And doctors.
And doctors, exactly, Eckart. And for you, it's not too late. I mean, we are waiting for you as well. So, but I regard you as a fellow doctor and a fellow scientist. So you are double invited. But for the young people following me, and scientists are for me not only natural scientists, but also scientists people who are working as economists, but with a scientific rigor, with, let's say, an empirical scientific rigor. That is a very important species to enter politics if you want to make a difference, in particular for climate change.
Thank you.
So, 3 last words. First, what did Corona show us? Health is a global issue. We cannot buy ourselves out on an island, not even in England. So the solution must be global too. And we don't have to do it for empathy with people in the low and middle income countries. It's for our own good to help to have more healthy people on a healthy planet. That's message number 1. Message number 2 is you don't have to wait to be important. As a student, you might think, well, once I will be in a position to change something. You're important now, and you're the first generation to feel and witness the changes of climate change and health. Look into the news and you'll find plenty of it. Look at Australia, look at Siberia, look at the ice melting. And you're the last generation to change something about how bad it will get for the next generations. So my second appeal is you're important now. Think of your influence on your mates, on your peer group, on your clubs you're in, on your social networks. Think of your family, of your aunts and uncles, and who's a doctor. Share the Lancet Climate Countdown pages. There are very many medical professionals who have never heard of this connection so far. So it's a really hot topic. Share it, be responsible, and be part of the solution. Ask your parents if they have a bank account, which bank are they in? Do they have an investment strategy that is pro-life, that is divesting from fossil fuels? And on the long run, you will be richer with this strategy. It's a matter of time, but be the first mover. And so my challenge to you would be for this week, choose your lever. Where do you think you could make the biggest difference? And don't think you're too small to make a difference. We're in this all together, and we'll save our ass or die, basically. And it's as dramatic as that sounds. So there's hope, but it's real. It's us. Scientists are agreeing on this, and we have to act.
Yeah, we're in this together. And I think really the narrative has moved away from, oh, what can we do, to there's so much we can do.
Yeah.
And I think both the speakers have given you guys very concrete strategies.
And say no to your professor when they say growth is the solution.
Actually, there have been some fascinating questions about population growth and degrowth as well. So maybe really do circulate the questions to all of us, and hopefully we can
more
get
education to women is the best solution to climate change and population. But you're the best examples.
So I don't know, I hand over. I can't thank you both enough. It's been an inspiring conversation to me. It's rejuvenated my own interest in the issue, and I think I can take the liberty to say that for the audience as well.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Professor Lauterbach and Dr. von Hirschhausen, for taking the time for this highly interesting discussion. And also thank you, Dr. Schroeder, for asking these engaging questions and also for engaging with the questions from the audience. Yeah, you all certainly shed light on both the direct and indirect impact of climate change on health, and also on the political changes and the behavioral changes that are necessary to leave hope for a green future that also brings all of us health. Thank you so much. We are looking forward to the rest of our symposium events and wish you and our audience a good day. Thank you all so much, and stay safe and healthy. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you.